Hello. Hello, my name's Elliot. Today we're doing a new thing. It's called Ushi Asks, and it's an interview-related segment thing for us. We're doing it, and basically today I'm interviewing MSP and co-leader of the Scottish Green Party, Patrick Harvie. Hello, Patrick.
Hello.
So we wanted to devise some kind of way to, I guess, enter into interesting conversations with interesting people doing interesting things, and we'd had brief conversations before, and I thought you were the first person that came to mind. So thanks for coming through, and thanks for agreeing to have a little chat today.
Thanks for having me.
I guess just off the bat, how about giving us an overview of how Scottish Greens are kind of contextually at the moment, and with the lead up to the May elections, like how you're feeling, and like what with the certain things kind of moving forward in terms of policy, like green policy coming into action, and including like the under 22s bus passes and other such. I suppose like if you don't mind giving us an overview of how things are going, and like what
Sure.
you think is at this stage, how Scottish Greens are doing, and how you're feeling about it all.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a really exciting time for the party. The party was formed in the same year I was, 1973.
Oh, wow.
So over many years, there was a complete lack of any success, nobody getting elected on the political landscape. Then with the start of devolution, we started to have a voice. And it's been very frustrating because we've always represented or tried to represent a real sense of urgency about the changes the world needs, the changes our society needs, and that people need. And now in the last 6 months, we've got the opportunity to take that voice into government. I think we've got a good track record of achieving things at a smaller scale as an opposition party, pushing the government out of its comfort zone a wee bit. But there's always limits to what you can do there.
Yeah.
Now we're at this exciting point of being in government for the first time, and also we've got a much bigger membership. Over the last couple of years, folk haven't been able to get out and campaign in the normal way because of the obvious, the C word.
Yeah, shall not be named. Yeah.
Now we're able to get out there and do that again. So there's all this capacity in the party, and energy in the party, and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
But at another level, it's also quite a frightening time because we're taking on this responsibility 20 or 30 years too late for the kind of changes that were needed.
Yeah, totally.
The climate emergency, the changes that are required to address that are so fast and so big now that it becomes really, really difficult to do it in a fair way that makes society, that stops us becoming even more unequal. So it's an incredible challenge that we're able to face up to, but we're now able to do it with a bigger voice than we've ever done before.
Yeah, totally. I definitely want to touch on the lack of change in the last 10-20 years, specifically around the climate, because I remember being quite young and learning about climate change when I was a teenager, and that was probably like the early noughts, and I distinctly remember it being a thing that felt like a conversation that was about to be had, and it was a thing that was going to be dealt with. I guess this is probably like how I myself transitioned from some sort of kind of vaguely liberal character to someone a bit more left wing, was because when I realized that things weren't getting addressed, and also being queer as well, like there's many things that radicalize you or change your perspective, and I think that climate change was probably one of the first things that made me think, okay, people aren't actually trying to make things better for a planet we all share. And I think the stagnancy, exactly. I think that your point is quite clear, that like there has been time to do things, and if we had been making progress in the past, we would have such an easier transition now.
Absolutely.
It's like but it's kind of like becoming a many things. It's becoming a shaken up bottle situation that is just becoming untenable, and trying to, and it makes the position of a party like the Scottish Greens even harder, because there is that kind of urgency that, despite it existing in the past, has now transitioned into, well, like, if we literally don't do anything literally right now, we won't have a planet to work and live and breathe on. And trying to, I guess, kind of create that sense of urgency in people is, I guess it can be kind of traumatic.
Yeah.
It can make people feel really anxious.
And even when people feel the urgency, they also need to feel hope. They need to feel that there is something they can actually do, because defeatism would be every bit as debilitating as denial on this. Just before the first lockdown, I got invited along to one of the climate strike demos in George Square. And my mum was in town that day, and so she came along, and she got asked up to speak as well. And it was really quite a kind of moving moment for me, because my mum was a green activist decades ago, before there was any kind of electoral success. I remember being, I guess, kind of 8 or 9 years old, and getting taken along to Green Party branch meetings in somebody's living room and sitting in the corner reading or whatever. And so you had these 3 generations of people who have that sense of urgency, have that sense of anger, but this recognition that if the world had listened back in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s and started to make the changes that were necessary, it would have been easy.
Yeah.
Well, not, it's not like it would have been a walk in the park, but we would have had time to do it.
Yeah.
And it would have been a lot cheaper to do it on that time scale as well.
Yeah, I do think that,
and yet, the oil and gas industry spent 20 years plus hiding the fact that they knew the problem was there. Then another 20 years pumping out climate denial propaganda to create a conspiracy movement really effectively around the world. And then in the last 5 to 10 years, they've shifted away from denial into delay. And saying, yes, of course we must have a transition, but we must do it slowly. And it's nauseating to be told by the people who stopped us doing it slowly to slow down. Yeah. Now we have to do it fast.
It is it's kind of a form of gaslighting in many ways, especially for people who have been trying to make this issue a central part of a societal conversation, and being told by the companies that basically are responsible for the climate catastrophe to basically sit down, miss, keep your voice down, we'll get to it.
Yes.
And and I think that the place that that we're at culturally now, with the resurgence of an anti-war movement and a pro planet movement, especially in the slightly younger generation, early to mid 20s, late teens, is a very kind of radicalizing and encouraging moment, because it does seem that it doesn't feel kitschy to suggest that lots of people of that age are aware, kind of vehemently aware, that their future is not going to be rosy if climate change is not dealt with, and that is a very powerful thing to see. And it's obviously it's too late. Well, it's not too late, but it's it feels like it's a movement that should have happened.
It's too late for this to be easy. This is going to be difficult, and the 21st century is going to be a tough one. It already is. But I've spoken to folk involved in the kind of climate strike movement who quite honestly say, stop telling us we're inspiring. We don't want to hear that. But there is something to acknowledge there, that this is a generation that's got a right to feel angry and betrayed, and could very well have turned that into defeatism and just cynicism. But they're not. They're saying, we're angry, but we're also not resigned to failure on this. And we're going to turn our energies into something constructive. And that's really important.
It's great, and it's really beautiful to say. And I mean, I know that there's some kind of fallacies around the youth will save us thing, but I am optimistic that even despite how hard the future might be in many ways for a lot of people, I am kind of at least kind of encouraged that like when a lot of these activists get a little bit older, that they will be the face of politics in the future. Obviously, like as I say, you know, it's we shouldn't be like obviously aiming for that as like a kind of a, well, it'll be fine, we'll just sort it. Like things will sort it out. The kids got it. But I also because that's the thing. It's just old guard sort of companies and politicians.
Well, they've got the potential to change politics, but also we need to change much more than just politics. We need to change the way we engineer stuff. We need to change the way we design and build stuff. We need to change the way the media reports on this. We need to change the way the artistic community tells the story of these changes. There's so much of this, and it needs to affect every walk of life. So the fact that you've got a generation of people who are not resigned to failure, it has to be about changing politics, but it has to be about everything else from banks and industry through to
it's a collectivist
community
spirit.
Creativity.
It is about like people working together as opposed to. I mean, that's obviously like that was the kind of one of the stumbling blocks of against kind of individualist ideas of combating climate change, like recycling and stuff, which is obviously important to do. But that was kind of like the fig leaf given when I was growing up, that was basically the only thing we had to do was just kind of cut back and like put not use plastic bags or something.
We all do a little bit.
Oh yes, we've all got to tighten our belts, folks. Got to constantly tighten our belts because it's our responsibility to deal with the
carbon footprint concept is similar. It was created by very big, powerful organisations with, not as if to say this isn't a problem, stop thinking about it, but as if to say this is all about you. This is your responsibility, and so long as you just think about your responsibility, we don't have to think about ours.
And that's that feeds a reactionary reaction, because it feeds frustrated Joe Public's idea that it's their responsibility, which obviously it isn't, and they're like, well, like, screw this, I'm not responsible for this, and it kind of turns into a certain kind of denialism that anything needs to be done in the first place.
And a sense of individual responsibility and willingness to act is fantastic, but it needs to lead into system change as well. It needs to lead into what's the context people are living in, the economic context, the social context, what's affecting people's choices and constraining people's choices and making the more sustainable choices really, really difficult for people. And unless you change those systemic issues, then inevitably, I mean, look at the energy stuff that's going on at the moment, for example. If you have a lot of wealth, if you're sitting on a house that's gone up dramatically in value since you bought it when they were cheap. Oh, how many houses are you sitting on? I don't know. If you've got those assets, you can invest in energy efficiency, in a zero emission heating system. You can invest in electric vehicles. You can buy all the green bling. I don't want to use that phrase, because all those technologies do have an important role to play.
But they
need to be there for everybody.
And
unless we invest collectively. So a big part of my job, for example, is on zero emission heating in buildings. Glasgow tenements, if you live in a Glasgow tenement, there is no way that you can make the really substantive changes to that whole building on your own. There are some things you can do, importantly, but the re-engineering of that building's heating system isn't something that each individual flat resident can do, whether you own it or you're a tenant or whatever. And unless we shift away from the idea that that's your responsibility to buy a different boiler, or replace your boiler
like
with a different system
or something, or like a kind of a
heat networks, communal district heating systems can be a really effective way of not just heating those buildings, but also generating the revenue collectively, not for an energy company, but for investment in the fabric of the building and energy efficiency. That's a really good solution for Glasgow tenements. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to take collective action, not individual action to do it.
Yeah, totally. If you break down the conversation to to the everyday person, it's kind of like the logical solution to the problem, because ultimately, as much as people are more atomized in many different ways, I think I would say that most people kind of recognize that it's any kind of consumerist sort of buy-in ideology that you can't expect everyone to A, have the resources, B, have the commitment, C, have the time, and D, have I guess the kind of investment, because and I think there's a kind of a libertarian idea that that's just people's choice. People should have the freedom to buy or not buy. They should be able to invest in the planet or not invest in the planet. And it's not to sound I don't know, Maoist or something, but sometimes you just have to make decisions. You have to make decisions on behalf of people for their greater good. No one liked no one liked the lockdown, but it was understood that it had to be done in order to protect other people. Obviously, it was done extremely ineffectively in many ways, but at the same time, it is a collective good that we do. Same as the response to the energy crisis and the climate crisis.
Yeah,
very interlinked.
And those big kind of society-wide decisions are going to be far easier to make and easier for people to accept if people have a voice in them. If they don't feel that it's just something being done to us all, but something that we collectively decide about and collectively shape. So, things like this local election that's coming up. Local elections tend to get really low turnout. People tend to have quite often, understandably, a cynical attitude to how power gets hoarded inside a council. And Greens are really keen to try and find ways to break that open and have participative and deliberative processes, ways of sharing power between an institution like a council, elected councillors, and the people they represent. Things like community budgeting is one way of doing that. Things like citizens' assemblies and citizens' juries to make sure that decisions are shaped by more often or more easily shaped by the kind of people who don't necessarily get involved in party politics or stand for election, but are active parts of a community. And if you compare Scotland and the UK to a lot of other European countries, we have this really low level of participation because we have this really kind of absence of local powers, of decentralisation. Power gets hoarded in centralised places in this country, and people that needs to change. People
really, recognise that quite rightly in certain regards, that there's only so much power they have in their society. I think that's one of the reason that defeatism comes, is because people. It's like tangent, or it's like kind of. It's probably one of the reasons why things with Russia, but the Russian people and their kind of, I guess, proximity to the war in Ukraine is so abstract, because trying to make that a thing, it's the Russian people and they're on board with this. I think that in the same way that the Russian people are probably pretty disillusioned with what they can do politically, with having a dictator like Putin, in the same way, in a different sense, in the UK, people feel very unable to change things. And I think that, but I think that's also education as well. I think that people aren't very well. So I certainly wasn't educated on how the electoral system works in the UK. I didn't, I certainly wasn't taught how to navigate tax either. So I think there's many things that people would understand and would be more involved in. And I think that one of the things I think is interesting about the upcoming election is the role that councillors can play in representing the democratic will of their local area, because people are, I'll think to say, but people are micro, they're not macro. They focus on their areas and they focus on what's happening. They focus on the fact that their bins aren't being taken out. A Glasgow staple, lots of bin issues, but it's a thing that affects people's day to day. And I think that what would you say about the role that the Green candidates that are standing in on May the 5th can do if they were abstractly elected, ex candidate in X area, Like, what do you feel like this push would enable the Greens to be able to do for local people?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got 7 councillors the last election, and I think we can get more at this one in Glasgow. If you look at the Glasgow Green Party's Twitter account posted a lovely picture the other day once we confirmed all the candidates of all the Green candidates in each of the 23 wards, and it's a really young bunch of people. I'm not sure if it's kind of 50% under 30. It looks certainly 50% under 35, something like that. So it's a pretty young crowd. Good gender balance of men, women, non-binary people. There's an opportunity, I think, to change the face and the look and the tone of local politics, because there are big barriers to standing, and there are big barriers to being a councillor even once you've stood. It's a demanding job, and it's not very well paid for people who take it seriously enough to put the hours in. So we need to change that at national level. It should be, a viable thing for people to do, including for young people to do, including for people with caring responsibilities to do. There are big barriers that need to be removed, but we can change the look of it so that our council looks more like the community that it represents. Yeah. Obviously, you want councillors who are going to work hard, who can be good at the job. That goes for all political parties, but there's something deeper about changing the nature of councils so that it's not just people who've got certain privileges that are able to do the job.
Well, I think that's a really important point to make, especially around payment and the ways in which public representatives are situated in class structure, because, for example, an MP's salary compared to a councillor's salary, which is, I mean, one of the humbling things of not being paid very well is that you kind of, or at least not being paid as much as you probably should be, is that, like, you don't see it as, like, you do it because it's something that you've decided that is, you might have to take a pay cut of some kind, but, like, you're doing it because you think it's important and it's worth investing in. Whereas if you slide to the other side of the scale, MPs on 80 plus K a year and complaining that they're not being paid enough, it sounds very like, it sounds like a career. It sounds like a career schism, because if your MPs are being paid the same, I'm being paid the same level as the average income in the country, then they're going to have a different perspective on what having that kind of salary is like for the rest of, for their view on the rest of the country. Like, at least that's my perspective, and I think that like what would you say about ongoing green initiatives around I guess kind of, because we're talking about like kind of having councillors be more relevant and visible, but how would you say to like say the proposition of arguing, because obviously, like, I know you're in favour of like a wealth tax and like certainly a windfall tax post-COVID, which is just incredible that it's not happening, and that like that people with the broadest shoulders, etc., should be bearing the brunt of this. And obviously, like, many people have made an awful lot of money out of COVID. Like, in the same way that like people think it's just like all doom and gloom, people, same with war, same with many things, there is money to be made in these sort of situations. Obviously, Tesco have made a lot of money over companies like that, and their prices are still going up, and people are like, well, where does it stop? So like I guess to bring it back is what would you say like the role of the Greens in Scotland will be around, I guess, kind of wealth inequality in general, like what going forward?
I mean, I think we've already shown in the last session of Parliament that you can make progress on this, and it's more acceptable to the public than some politicians feared. We now have a 5-band income tax system, which means that everybody whose income is average or anything less than average is protected, but it's higher up the income scale you go, the more you're paying. Now, it's not a wildly dramatic departure. It's a significant change from the UK position, and the UK since then has kept on with the threshold changes, effectively giving tax cuts at the top end.
Yes, yeah.
Well, we've not copied that. So
Good.
over time, the gap has got bigger. And there would have been a lot of politicians, like back in 2016 when we first proposed this, but they did.
Yeah.
It landed really well. People accepted it, including those who are paying a bit more. If you're on 35 grand, you're paying a bit more.
Yeah.
Not wildly more, but
you
a
know
bit
you can
more.
afford it.
If you're paying, if you're earning 50, 60,000, you are paying substantially more. So, yeah, people will accept this if they genuinely believe that it's fair.
Yeah.
Moving on to wealth, and yeah, wealth inequality is even more stark than income inequality. One of my frustrations with devolution is that since the beginning, since '99, we've always had the power to change local taxes, and Parliament after Parliament after Parliament has been deadlocked, unable to change or unwilling to change what is currently the council tax and non-domestic rates system to have something that's fairer and more progressive. The way we've tried in this current session now to propose breaking that deadlock is with a citizens' assembly. Some countries have used citizens' assemblies really effectively to cut through something where the political parties can't find an agreement, can't find any consensus. So that may well be a way of doing it. I think even at the moment, though, there's a recognition, there's a moment of opportunity to recognise that most political parties do know the current council tax system is broken.
Yeah.
It's based on valuations that are wildly out of date. It's not an effective property tax, and property is one of the biggest sources of wealth for those who own it.
Yep.
So there's a real need to address that. We've also got a commitment in the current programme for government for a system of land value capture, which, you know, policy geeks will recognise the term, but not everybody will. So land values are effectively created by public policy. They're created by things like the planning system. What are you allowed to do with a piece of land that determines its value? Things like public investment. If the public sector pays for railways or roads or infrastructure or broadband or whatever, then that again changes the land value. So most of land values are unearned wealth that's created by the community, by the public, and at the moment landowners just collect that.
Yeah.
Ka-ching.
Yeah.
So a land value capture system, there's various ways of doing it, is about saying let's bring some of that increase, that uplift in land values back to the public purse for investment again in public priorities. So we now have a commitment to do this. We don't yet know exactly which system it's going to be, because as I say, there's a range of different ways of doing it, but it could be a really important way of generating revenue for investment in things like bringing the energy efficiency of our built environment up to decent standard. Things like investing in active travel and public transport, so that folk can move around sustainably and affordably.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a range of different ways. Ultimately, I'd like a pure wealth tax. That's out with the powers of the Scottish Parliament, but we can change these systems of local tax, and that can do a lot in this direction. If Scotland was independent, or if the UK had a halfway decent UK government, then maybe there'd be the potential to do that in a much more substantial way.
Well, one of the things I think is kind of encouraging about, especially what you're saying there is, and also kind of talking about independence, is the trajectory of Scotland. And I think one of the things I think that is encouraging about Scotland, specifically at this point in time, and it's kind of like the Achilles heel in the New Labour project is in a certain sense enabling the Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland to have more voice for themselves. It's a contrast, and I think that like what people who aren't Scottish, I'm not Scottish, I'm Welsh, but I think the contrast from the exterior is that like, especially when Westminster is so gridlocked. To even see a reference in the country that you live in of like separate nations and, you know, local governments doing change effectively. I mean, but like after 10 years of austerity or whatever, I think that the only change that people have seen across the country that they recognise is negative change. It's inflation and wages not going up with it. It's a rise in energy bills, a rise in the seeming promise of Brexit to those who believed in it, to basically for it to not really bear much fruit.
Yeah.
And I think
it's quite confusing for people as well, because some of those changes have been completely out with people's control. A pandemic comes along. Everybody knew that there was always a risk of that.
Yeah.
Probably over a long time, there's a certainty of it. At some point it's going to happen, but it came along at us.
Yeah.
Other aspects self-inflicted. I mean, I would call Brexit a self-inflicted social and economic and political damage, and a lot of it is so contested. People, absorbing different kind of values and ideas and facts and alternative facts from different media sources, creating a different perception and picture of the world they're living in, and reaching a completely different understanding of what's happening and why. And again, some of that confusion is also deliberate. That kind of sense that if you can just keep people confused about what's going on in the world and unable to trust in any kind of basic reality, then they're more easy to manipulate. And that's, you mentioned Putin a while ago, that's been core to his media strategy for decades. Trump and Brexit were also examples of the same kind of thing. And now you see these kind of hard right and far right media platforms springing up, again promoting conspiracy theories and
keeping people disillusioned with what to expect from their reality. I didn't vote for Brexit, but one of the things I feel is the most kind of, deflating about things that is most deflating about Brexit in this current time, which, as you kind of alluded to before, was kind of foreseeable, is, people's standards of living going down. I'm not saying that they're kind of necessarily like one-to-one linked, but there is obviously a deficit to leaving a massive trading bloc and not really having a great deal. Theresa May's deal feels very quaint now, thinking back on, but and I think
all those hundreds of brilliant trade deals they were going to sign overnight.
Yeah. Oh God, it's oven ready, folks. I do feel kind of sad for because of the thing. I think what people really saw in Brexit wasn't necessarily Brexit as a project. I think it was, at least to my perspective, it was a conduit for some kind of change. And I think that obviously, like, if anyone who's possibly a little bit more aware would have realised that it was the Tory party screwing them over. It wasn't necessarily the European Union, even though there's obviously issues with the European Union. But yeah, I think that like the fact that the at this stage, after 10 years of kind of I don't know, the shaking of the cage of the United Kingdom, I think people, it's easy to see people being exhausted with politics, or at least kind of turning to reactionary sort of mindsets, especially around things like the conspiracy things, and also and that's obviously fed into things about the pandemic and the vaccine, and moving on slightly, I do want to refer to a question that I was posed, or we were posed on the Instagram when we posted about talking to you today, which is very nice to have you. We didn't get like a hell of a amount of questions, but the one that popped up, which I think is interesting and kind of relevant to the moment, and I've not condensed it, so I'm just going to read the question. Sure. So it's a question from Jay Sutherland, and the question is, my question for Patrick is, do the Scottish Greens, since entering government, still hold their pro-peace, anti-NATO policy? It seems in recent weeks the co-leader Lorna Slater and SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon seem to say that, quote, Trident was holding us back from intervening properly in Ukraine. This was a worrying signal that the Scottish government is more pro-NATO, and that the Greens have yet to condemn the militarization of Europe and close ties with NATO. Can Patrick confirm this? So I guess to kind of like reframe the question, in the kind of the ongoing debate about, I guess, like where the West or Western countries kind of sit with the conversation about what NATO is, what its role that it plays in European kind of, I guess, security, and the ongoing Ukraine and Russia war. I suppose to kind of reiterate that question, where does Scottish Greens sit on, I guess, that aspect of things, like NATO specifically?
I mean, it's obviously a very timely question, and I mean, our policy as a party hasn't changed. I think there are probably folk in the party who know that we need to debate that policy, not necessarily to change it fundamentally, but to understand what does the current crisis of the invasion of Ukraine, how does that change the context? What does that mean going forward? How do we see the future of security? Now, fundamentally, the most important things that affect the security of the world are the conditions that support peace. Things like resource and physical safety of countries around the world in relation to, the climate crisis is one of the most profound threats to people's security and their ability to live peaceably with one another. Resource pressures. But in relation to right now, we remain firmly opposed to NATO membership and to Trident. And the principal reason why we would oppose NATO membership if Scotland was to become independent is the first strike nuclear policy. There is clearly a need for countries to cooperate on security issues, and I would say peace and security rather than framing it as defence necessarily, because quite often defence is code for attack. But peace and security, countries should be cooperating on that on a strategic level across Europe, and preferably on a fully international basis. But to do that as part of an organisation with a first strike nuclear policy, we would have a fundamental objection to that. But I think we do need to be willing to look honestly at what are the challenges now, particularly where democratic countries are genuinely, I think, testing whether economic interventions rather than military interventions can be effective. And it will remain to be seen. Right now, even just today, it's being reported that Russia and India are talking now. Can Russia find other markets for its oil and gas? If Europe is going to massively ramp down over a short period of time its own role in providing a market for Russian fossil fuels, if those kind of economic changes can be successful at forcing a regime like Putin's to reassess its decision to attack a democratic country, that's a really important question that the world is facing right now. Because we need to find ways to prevent that kind of action. I mean, one of the most fundamental reasons why I've always been opposed to nuclear weapons is not just the revulsion of the idea that our freedom and security has to depend on the fear of annihilation. That's sick enough. But any system that depends on these massive power blocks having these weapons is always vulnerable to the question, what happens if somebody who cannot be, in inverted commas, responsible with that power, it comes to have their finger on the button. A lot of people were frightened enough of that with Trump, but Vladimir Putin is very clearly somebody willing to just invade, annex. Look, there is a degree of hypocrisy in this as well, and we need to be consistent. The sight of world leaders going and speaking to Saudi Arabia about can we get your fossil fuels instead, when Saudi Arabia is also perpetrating an increasingly violent war at the moment, creating the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. Long-standing injustices around the world, where the world has turned a blind eye, or even actively supported illegal occupation and annexation of territory. So yes, we need consistency, but
there's a few things I'd like to kind of link off of that. I suppose the first one relates to kind of the person asked a second question that I feel like I should bring up, and it's related to the impacts that sanctions have on local people in the country where the sanctions are happening. So, what is your perspective on, I guess, how the trickle down of sanctions? Basically, as we're experiencing rising costs in Britain, that's a macro example of what's happening probably in Russia right now, related to like local economies and like people. Because that's the thing, like. Sure, for Putin probably sucks to have like a tanking economy, but like the people obviously who feel that are the ones who are at the bottom of the run. And I guess what was your perspective on that, like in relation to sanctions?
No, it's very clear that an economic intervention like a sanctions regime is going to impact on ordinary people. I think it's a hell of a lot better than a military intervention, which will, again,
escalate things.
Not only escalate things, but it literally is about destroying people's lives. It won't be the powerful, and very very often it won't be military targets who are the only people who suffer from that. It will be civilian targets as well. But the impact of an economic intervention of that kind is hopefully one that's more manageable. It is also one that is shared between the countries who are imposing those economic sanctions and the country that's the target. It's not that we're simply imposing that harm on Russian civilians. It's a decision to take an intervention which will have an impact on both the sanctions imposers and the targets of the sanctions. So there's a degree of it causes harm, of course it does, but the alternatives are to do nothing, which is unconscionable,
it's a hard decision to make when there's
make
like
a military intervention, which is even more brutal.
There's only so few options. I mean, what would you? I suppose maybe I would ask on that, like, what would you say there may possibly other alternatives to sanctions that are certain kinds of interventions that a country like Scotland or the UK or whatever can have on such an issue? I mean, I think that unfortunately the sad truth is this war will only bear out until Putin basically gets bored and moves on. But with that knowledge as well, do you think that like sanctions on Russia will end up possibly being fruitless, or possibly just kind of falling on deaf ears in Putin's sense?
It remains to be seen. I don't know, and I think anybody would be pretty foolish to say they know exactly how this is going to play out. But I think long term, the kind of things that the world doesn't do well on this are not things that will create a quick fix to an immediate crisis, but long-term solutions which have to do with investment in the capacity for negotiation, arbitration, conciliation. We should place at least as much emphasis on the world's capacity to talk as on our capacity to defend one another or to attack one another. As well as the consistency and kind of ethical consistency of our general economic policy. I mean, over years, we've seen the UK and others provide a perfectly safe harbour for very clearly unethical, criminally acquired Russian money. There hasn't been any attempt since the downfall of communism to actually support the development of a genuinely democratic future for Russia. Western countries have simply stood by as a kleptocracy took power, and that's not very surprising because the West allows that to happen in these countries as well, where wealth concentrates in the hands of very few people.
Powerful, I guess to kind of wrap up. Well, actually, kind of a point that I'd like to kind of like bring sort of back to the Russia situation. Do you think that the transition from oil and gas will come not from the means to kind of make a better future, or do you think it'll come from something as like crass as we just don't like Putin anymore, so we don't want to buy his oil, and therefore that's our that's our ticket for a green transition because there's going to be less oil to get. Obviously, it probably won't be as cut and dry as that, but yeah, is that? Do you think that possibly might be the? I don't know. Do you think that'll be a hinge point? So you can just start again from where you were at.
Yeah, the question about what the current context does, do we accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels, is really critical. I talked earlier about this critical question: can an economic intervention be effective as an alternative to a military one? This is the other big strategic question for the world at the moment. Are we going to use a moment like this to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels, or, as the UK government seems to want to do, double down on let's just drill for every drop we can get?
Yeah.
The climate crisis itself should be enough of a reason to say we need to radically ramp down our dependence on fossil fuels and make that transition quickly. This current situation, not just the energy security issues arising from the invasion of Ukraine, but the cost of living crisis that come directly from that as well, absolutely has to be a moment when we commit fully to that dramatic shift away from fossil fuels. We can do it. The technology is available already. It's just a question of having the economic systems in place that allow us to deploy that quickly and affordably, and make sure that people can cope with that change, rather than only those who've got plenty of wealth being able to invest in it for themselves.
Yeah, totally. Well, we'll just wrap up in a sec, but last point I'd like to bring up, I suppose, is the ongoing kind of prospect of second independence referendum, and your both timescale and idea of where's that going? Because obviously in the last election it was a very vocal talking point from both the Greens and SNP about if you elect us, this will happen in the next parliament. And obviously there's practically no way that the UK government will easily enable it, because obviously they've just done Brexit and they want to have a strong union and everything sticking together, and obviously the idea of Scotland becoming independent would be not only a schism that would seemingly affect other nations within the United Kingdom, but also would just damage the ego of that project. So I suppose, where do you see independence in its relation to the current Parliament, or the current term?
Yeah. Well, our intention remains exactly what it was when we said in the 21 election that we'll have that referendum. We want to propose it in the first half of the Parliament. And you'll expect to see the bill to set up that referendum introduced fairly soon, I think. The people of Scotland elected a majority in their parliament committed to that. They have repeatedly elected majorities from Scottish seats at Westminster as well as to the Scottish Parliament in favour of that. And in many ways, the longer the UK government has nothing more to say than no, you can't.
Yeah.
Not even trying to say why we shouldn't, but just saying no, you can't. I think that'll push more and more people to say yes, we will. As for timing, if they dig their heels in and just keep on refusing, then the matter may have to be resolved in the courts. And there is a mixed view, a range of views about the legal arguments about whether we can go ahead with a referendum without their permission. But there's also a UK election coming up in 24. 24 is the latest that the next UK election can be. And what exactly are the Tories going to go into that election saying? Is all they've got just the refusal to say no, you can't, and at the same time, please re-elect Boris Johnson? By the way, we don't even think he's fit for office. Which was Douglas Ross's position not more than 5 minutes ago. Yeah. I think there comes a moment when you really have to question why are we constantly saying, or why is the UK government constantly saying they believe in democracy but refusing to listen to the repeated democratic will of the people of Scotland? Yeah,
and I think that the point that Douglas Ross kept coming back to in the previous election was that they'll just do it anyway. Even if they don't get the permission, which sounds like it's like 2 points, isn't it? Because one of which is why should the Scottish people need the permission of an exterior party of people to be able to have that referendum. And also the point that he's trying to make is that like the will of the Scottish people is only dictated by a certain kind of, I guess, legality, or like, I mean, there's obviously like a reference point to Catalonia and there wasn't an election many like about 8 years ago or whatever, 10 years ago, where there was a kind of a non-binding kind of poll or like election of some sorts where people were kind of voting on Catalonian independence.
I mean, we obviously want this to be done in a legal way, in a way that everybody accepts the rules of how the referendum should be conducted. That's the only way to have people accept the result, the outcome of a referendum, is for everyone to agree what the rules are. So it does need to happen legally, and it can happen legally. There's no reason why it can't. But this bizarre point is, if I was on the other side of this debate, I would be able to at least attempt to tell a story about why Scotland's future is better.
Like the union,
What is it they have to offer? What is it they have to persuade us with? Or it seems as though all they've got is to say, first of all, vote Tory because we're the only people who can stop a referendum. And then when people keep on voting for pro-independence parliaments, all they say is, no, you can't, because... that's the end of it. That's the end of it. I'd be able to come up with a better argument than that than Douglas Ross seems to be able to do at the moment, but they're not even trying.
Yeah, it's very much like a patronising parent trying to tell who they see as their child to settle down and no, you can't have sweets or something. it's not very convincing. But anyway, we'll wrap up. But yeah, thanks for joining us today on this.
Thanks for inviting me.
This interview thingy. I feel like I want to do like a curtains thing, like to George from Cranberry Flat, and like thanks for watching, and I hope you are informed. And yes, May 5th is an election. It's coming up in across the whole country. I think, like across the UK. Or is it just
different in different bits of England. So all the local authorities in London are having elections. I think they're staggered in some places. So check the websites and register to vote.
Register and agree, etc. But thanks, sir, and big handshake.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Right.